At the John McGivney Children's Center, we provide therapy and adjunct support services for children and youth with physical and developmental disabilities up into the age of 21. Many parents find themselves in situations where the decisions that they made on behalf of their children before they turned 18 suddenly require legal proof that they were authorized to make such a decision. This is especially true for decisions dealing with a child's finances, disability pension, and medical decisions. On this episode of the Speak Up podcast, I engaged in conversation with Alinka Steffen, a staff lawyer for Arch Disability Law Center, as we chatted about the important topics of guardianship and capacity, where Stefan provided some helpful legal tidbits on how to successfully navigate this important juncture in your child's life. And my conversation with Stefan starts right now. I want to take a moment to welcome you to the Speaking podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you this afternoon all about guardianship and everything that goes along with that. Great to see you today, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about capacity and guardianship as well.
Absolutely. So, I'm wondering if you can tell me how the law changes when a child with a disability turns 18 and what parents and guardians can expect from a legal perspective once that occurs.
Of course. So, in law, what changes is really the same as when a teen without a disability turns into a legal adult and is no longer a child. And actually, when it comes to the right to make your own decisions about your own personal care, the age is actually 16. Um, so the laws generally, when it comes to children, are centered around what is in the best interests of a child. So um, but then when someone is an adult, that's no longer the legal test or the legal standard in terms of making your own decisions. And the other thing is that the laws in Ontario presume capacity. So what that means is that the starting point in law is that every person, whether or not they have a disability, has the capacity or the right to make decisions, every single decision in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm wondering, Alinka, if we can talk about the transition to adulthood piece of it. You alluded to 16 and 18, but I'm wondering from a legal perspective, what do you think parents and teens with disabilities need to know about their legal rights when it comes to transitioning to adulthood and how that may affect someone's family?
For sure. Um, so if this isn't happening already, it's really important for family members to start involving the young adult as much as possible in discussions and decisions about their life, and start identifying who is available to support the person to make certain decisions if they need support to make those decisions. Become familiar with the social supports that are available, are in place, and become familiar with the law. You don't have to become a lawyer or become super familiar with everything the law entails, but just a general understanding of someone's rights once they become an adult. And this is especially important because, as I mentioned earlier, we're no longer, when someone becomes an adult, we're no longer in the sort of best interest kind of framework. Um, Instead, adults now have what we call the dignity of risk. So at Arch, what our clients, what members of our community, what self-advocates tell us over and over again is how central to their life decision making is, and that a full life really includes the right to make decisions that others might not agree with, or that others might think are risky decisions, and the right to make mistakes. Um, and this even includes decisions about finances and about health. And so um, this principle is especially important for people with disabilities who historically have had their decision making rights taken away from them. And so becoming kind of familiar with this sort of new reality in which there is basically a legal permission to, make mistakes and start making decisions that others don't agree with. I think that often takes parents and family members by surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh, well, yeah, I'm wondering if we can talk about what specifically is capacity and the definition behind the term.
Absolutely. So capacity is basically the ability to make decisions. So I mentioned earlier that there is a presumption of capacity in law, and capacity is also it's issue specific, um, meaning that it can one's capacity to make a decision really has no bearing on the capacity to make other decisions. So there are all sorts of decisions that we all make in our daily life, and different decisions require different levels of understanding. So the law says that a person might not have the capacity to make certain decisions, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to make other decisions. So, for example, a person might not have the capacity to consent to a medical treatment, but they still retain, they still keep their capacity to manage their finances, for example, or the right to decide their living arrangement, where they live, who they live with. Um, and when I say that capacity can change over time, I mean that capacity isn't this sort of rigid, fixed state. Someone can regain capacity. Someone might only not have capacity every once in a while, sometimes maybe at even certain times of day. So it's really, really important to not think of capacity as this all or nothing thing, because it is specific to what issue you're making decisions on, and it's very fluid and can change over time. So a really important distinction is there's a difference between not having the capacity to make a decision and just needing support to make a decision. And when we look at capacity that way, we find that we can all make most decisions with the right support. So we really need to make sure that we're not making assumptions or furthering some myths about disability and decision making. Because some people assume that just because a person has a disability, they need a guardian or they need someone to make all of their decisions for them. But that's just not true. People with disabilities might need or want some extra support to make certain decisions, or it might take a bit longer to come to a decision, but that does not mean that they can't make the decision or that they should have their right to make a decision taken away from them. So unfortunately, persons with disabilities are often treated very, very differently. So for example, some complex financial decisions like a bank loan or a mortgage, we might seek information from a financial advisor or from friends and family about what decision makes the most sense for us. But persons with disabilities often don't get that benefit and are assumed just not to be able to make decisions just because they might want support to make the decision. So, again, wanting or needing support to make a decision does not mean that you don't have the capacity to make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And Olega, I'm wondering if we can transition our conversation to the idea of guardianship and what exactly guardianship is at its different times.
Of course. So guardianship is a legal term, and is a legal kind of system that gives a person's rights to make their own decision to someone else when that person doesn't have the capacity to make those decisions. So again, because we're starting from the presumption that someone is capable to make their own decisions, in order for guardianship to even be an option, there needs to be a capacity assessment and a legal finding of incapacity. So the in guardianship, the power to make decisions is substituted. It's fully transferred to another person that we call the guardian. And the guardian has this authority, this legal power to make certain decisions for another adult. And the law says that, before jumping to guardianship, alternative courses of action need to be considered first. So, in other words, if there is an option, which there almost always is, for someone to keep their decision-making rights, that's always going to be the preferable option. So before I talk more about guardianships, I want to briefly just mention the public guardian and trustee, which is often referred to as, by its initials, the PGT. So the PGT is a government office that automatically becomes someone's guardian in some cases, or becomes the guardian if no one else, like a friend or a family member, is available to act as someone's guardian. Guardianship can also be, it can depend on the type of decision-making rights. So guardianship can either be of property or of the person. Guardians of property, it can be the PGT. It's usually close family members. And this type of guardianship deals with financial decisions. So a guardian of property can buy things for the person that is subject to the guardianship, pay their bills, apply for benefits, open bank accounts, close bank accounts, things like that. Guardianship of the person can only be appointed by a court, and it can be partial, or it can even be up to what's called full guardianship, which gives the guardian control over a really, really broad range of decisions, including really important day-to-day decision making. So personal care decisions are decisions about a person's health care, about what food they eat, their shelter where they live, what clothing they wear, hygiene, and safety. They can make litigation decisions, come to settlement agreements. In some circumstances, a guardian of the person can even confine or use restraint on a person. So it's really, really, it's just it really highly controls someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Olega, I'm curious. You did a great job explaining what guardianship is in its different types. But I'm also curious to ask you about any specific things individuals with disabilities need to know about guardianship and how it may affect their adult life? What are your thoughts there?
Thank you. Yeah, so guardianship is meant to be and should always be a last resort option. Um, Many of our clients at Arch are subject to guardianship, and in our work, we see a lot of myths and assumptions about someone's capacity when they have a disability. And instead of being supported and empowered to make decisions, their freedom and dignity to make decisions are just taken away. Um, so the other really important thing about guardianship is that it can be misused pretty easily. So things like, who you live with, your nutrition, when you wake up, when you go to bed, the social services that you receive, not to mention the use of confinement. That's a really, really high degree of control, and there's no monitoring system in place for that control. So it's a really, um, a really sort of restrictive last resort um, option, and there are lots of other ways to support people to make their own decisions that are not as restrictive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Alinka, I'm also curious to ask you about how parents can best be an ally and support their children with disabilities when it's time for them to make decisions. So how do you think parents can best support their children with disabilities in their decision making process?
Yeah, that's a great question because parents often know their children um, very well, including how their disability affects them. So if your adult child wants you to, for example, you could act as what's called a support person for them in certain situations where they have to make decisions. So the role of a support person is not to make decisions for someone. Instead, it's to help the person understand the decision, what options are available to them, what might happen if you make one decision or another decision, clarifying information, prompting, explaining information in plain language, or other ways to make sure that information is understood. So, as a support person, a parent might also notice if their child, um, needs a break, is not having a good day, or might need to reschedule um, a meeting with someone or make a decision at another time. The other way that parents can really help is by advocating uh, for their child and educating others. So the law says that service providers, so um, people like doctors or companies like banks, for example, have what's called a duty to accommodate people with disabilities to the point of undue hardship. So those are legal terms, but what it really means is that if a person has a disability and needs extra support or modifications in order to participate in something, the service provider legally has to provide that. Um, and undue hardship is a legal term that basically says that accommodations need to be provided unless it would be almost impossible to do so. So unless the cost is, extremely outrageously expensive, or it would just be so dangerous to others' health and safety. And most of the time that's not the case. So I'll give you an example from a legal services point of view. As lawyers, we can only take instructions from people who we believe have the capacity to make decisions about their legal matter. So let's say a person labeled with an intellectual disability needs a lawyer. If we don't think that they can make legal decisions, we can't just jump to the conclusion that they don't have the capacity to make those decisions and, see who else has the capacity or who else can make that decision for them. Instead, we give accommodations. So some examples are um, using plain language, using pictures, um, allowing the person to have someone there for support, being flexible, booking more time for appointments or multiple appointments, giving information in an email before meeting with them to give them time to process and think. So the same thing applies at the doctor, at a bank, at a restaurant, or at school or work. And unfortunately, there are still people and companies who don't know that this is the law. So as family members, you can really help advocate and educate the people and the service providers in your adult child's life to help them make those decisions and make sure that they have the support required to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And Olinka, my final question for you this afternoon has to do with parents and their involvement on whether when they believe that their children may need certain assistance in making certain decisions. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the steps you think they need to take in order to get that done.
Yeah, so I also first want to say that guardianship, again, should only be permitted on the most limited basis. And even if there is guardianship or if a court has ordered guardianship, always include a person in that decision making. So one less restrictive option that I wanted to talk about is a support circle. And support circles are people in a person's life. This could be their friends or their family, maybe some professionals in their life who offer their help when a person with a disability needs to make an important decision. So they could provide support like emotional support to give choices or help them understand positive and negative consequences of a decision. And what we've learned from our clients, from members of the community and other advocates, is that this is often a really helpful option to kind of move away from substituting decision making to supporting someone to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Olinka, I really want to thank you for your insights and expertise on the subjects of both capacity and guardianship, and for providing some great information for our families and parents and children to make sound and meaningful decisions. Your time on my behalf is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having Arch on your podcast.